The gavel cracked like a gunshot, but the real violence was already unfolding. Richard didn't just want a divorce, he wanted a public execution. He brought his 24-year-old mistress to the front row, a living insult meant to break his wife. But he forgot one crucial detail. The atmosphere inside courtroom 302 of the Superior Civil Court was thick with an uneasy, voyeuristic tension. Divorce proceedings were usually private affairs, settled behind closed doors with quiet transfers of wealth and suppressed bitterness. But Richard Sterling, the ruthlessly successful CEO of Sterling Horizon Real Estate, had demanded a public trial. He didn't just want to dissolve his 15-year marriage to Beatrice. He wanted to destroy her. And he had brought props, sitting directly behind the plaintiff's table, crossing her deeply tanned legs in a designer skirt that was highly questionable for a court of law, was Chloe Beaumont. She was 24, blonde, and possessed the kind of meticulously sculpted figure that cost tens of thousands of dollars to maintain. She was Richard's mistress. Everyone in the room knew it. The press in the back row knew it. The Honorable Judge Marilyn Costas, peering over her reading glasses with undisguised contempt, certainly knew it. Richard had brought Chloe not just as a spectator, but as a deliberate psychological weapon. He sat at the plaintiff's table in a bespoke charcoal brownie suit, projecting the aura of a weary, wronged man, occasionally turning around to offer Chloe a tragic, brave smile. On the other side of the aisle sat Beatrice Sterling. Beatrice was a large woman. At 280 pounds, her weight had been the subject of Richard's private ridicule for the last 8 years, and now he was making it the centerpiece of a highly publicized legal spectacle. She wore a beautifully tailored navy blue wool suit that draped elegantly over her frame, her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a severe, immaculate chignon. She did not fidget. She did not weep. She sat with the rigid, statuesque stillness of a queen observing a peasant uprising, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Beside her sat Nathaniel Reed, a veteran defense attorney known for his quiet demeanor and lethal cross-examinations. He glanced at the circus unfolding at the plaintiff's table and then leaned in toward Beatrice. "He's playing exactly the hand we expected," Nathaniel whispered, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the gallery. "He wants you to break. Do not give him the satisfaction." "I stopped breaking for Richard 5 years ago, Nathaniel," Beatrice replied, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of tremor. "Let him dig." The audacity of Richard's lawsuit was staggering. He was not just filing for divorce. He was suing Beatrice for constructive abandonment and breach of marital contract due to a rock-solid prenuptial agreement signed 15 years ago, back when Richard was heavily in debt, and Beatrice's inherited trust fund had bailed out his failing first business. Beatrice was entitled to half of his current $500 million empire upon divorce. To bypass the prenup, Richard's legal team had concocted a vile strategy, proof that Beatrice had willfully defrauded him. They argued that her significant weight gain over the last decade was a deliberate act of sabotage, a refusal to maintain the standards of partnership which had allegedly caused Richard severe psychological distress, public humiliation in his corporate circles, and forced him to seek emotional refuge elsewhere. It was a legal Hail Mary, steeped in misogyny and fat phobia, designed entirely to humiliate Beatrice into settling for pennies to make the public nightmare stop. "All rise," the bailiff barked. Judge Costas struck her gavel. "Be seated. We are here for the matter of Sterling B. Sterling, Mr. Hayes, are you ready to present your opening statement?" Gregory Hayes, a slick, aggressive bulldog of a lawyer whose suits always looked a little too shiny, stood up and buttoned his jacket. "We are, Your Honor." Hayes walked over to the jury box, which was empty as this was a bench trial, but Hayes was performing for the reporters in the back row. "Your Honor, this is a case about a broken promise. When Richard Sterling married Beatrice 15 years ago, they entered into a partnership of mutual respect, mutual effort, and mutual representation. Mr. Sterling built an empire from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks to provide a life of unimaginable luxury. Hayes paused, turning to gesture theatrically at Beatrice. But what did the defendant do? As my client built their life, she destroyed herself. She surrendered to gluttony and lethargy. She gained over 140 pounds, refusing to attend corporate galas, refusing to stand by her husband's side, and effectively abandoning him in plain sight. We will prove that Beatrice Sterling's physical transformation was not a medical misfortune, but a weaponized apathy, a breach of the implied marital contract that forced my client into a state of severe emotional despair. Ark. And so draw, and so a low murmur rippled through the gallery. The sheer cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. Richard looked down, pressing 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose as if overwhelmed by the tragic reality of his life. Behind him, Chloe dabbed at a completely dry eye with a lace handkerchief. Beatrice didn't flinch. She simply watched Hayes with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly repulsive insect. "We will show," Hayes continued, his voice rising, "that the prenuptial agreement should be nullified due to fraudulent misrepresentation. You cannot marry a marathon runner, watch them willingly choose to become completely immobile, and then demand half of the race winnings." Judge Costa's expression was thunderous. "Mr. Hayes, this court has a very low tolerance for theatrical character assassination. I suggest you ground your arguments in established law, or this will be a very short trial." "Of course, Your Honor," Hayes said smoothly. "The law is firmly on our side. And to prove the extent of the emotional damages inflicted upon Mr. Sterling, I call our first witness." Hayes turned, looking directly at the young blonde woman in the front row. "The plaintiff calls Miss Chloe Beaumont to the stand." The courtroom held its collective breath as Chloe Beaumont strutted past the wooden gate. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a rhythmic, arrogant sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. She took the oath, placed her hand on the Bible with practiced solemnity, and sat in a witness box, making sure to adjust her posture so the natural light caught her high cheekbones. Richard looked at her with blatant adoration. Beatrice looked at a spot on the mahogany table. "Miss Beaumont," Hayes began, leaning on the podium, "could you describe your relationship with the plaintiff, Richard Sterling?" "We are partners," Chloe said, her voice a breathy, practiced purr. "In every sense of the word, we share a deep, emotional, spiritual, and romantic connection." "And when did this connection begin?" "About 2 years ago," Chloe answered smoothly. "Richard and I met at a charity gala for the Oakwood Hills Children's Hospital. He was there alone. He was always alone. Tom. And he, reached, "Objection," Nathaniel Reed said calmly, half rising from his chair. "Speculation and narrative. Sustained," Judge Costa snapped. "Keep the witness to the facts, Mr. Hayes." "Miss Beaumont," Hayes pivoted undeterred. "Can you describe Mr. Sterling's state of mind when you first met him?" Chloe sighed a tragic, theatrical sound. "He was a broken man. He confided in me that his home life was a nightmare. He told me that his wife Beatrice had completely let herself go. She refused to leave their estate. She spent her days gorging on expensive takeout and ordering luxury goods online, completely ignoring him. He felt trapped, repulsed, and entirely unloved. He just wanted a partner who took pride in herself, somebody who could stand beside a CEO without causing him public embarrassment." Gasps erupted from the back of the courtroom. The cruelty was naked, stripped of any legal pretense. "He showed me pictures," Chloe continued, emboldened by the audience. "Pictures of what she used to look like. It broke my heart. Richard is a man of high standards, and he was being dragged down by a woman who had given up on life, on health and on him. I didn't want to break up a marriage. I was just trying to save a drowning man. Hayes nodded sympathetically. So in your view, your relationship with Mr. Sterling was a direct result of the defendant's willful abandonment of her marital duties? Absolutely. Chloe nodded earnestly. Richard would never have looked twice at another woman if his wife had just put in the bare minimum of effort. He's a deeply loyal man. Thank you, Miss Beaumont. No further questions. Hayes returned to his seat, shooting a triumphant smirk at Nathaniel. Nathaniel slowly stood up. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly bored. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up a thin manila folder, and walked toward the witness box. "Miss Beaumont," Nathaniel began, his voice soft, almost conversational, "you paint a very tragic picture of a man driven to infidelity by sheer despair." "It's the truth," Chloe said, lifting her chin. "You stated you met Mr. Sterling 2 years ago, correct?" "Yes, in November. And he was broken, as you say, by his wife's appearance and behavior." Completely devastated, Nathaniel opened the folder. "Miss Beaumont, are you familiar with a company called Lumiere Aesthetics?" Chloe's confident facade cracked for a fraction of a second, a brief, imperceptible twitch of her right eye. Yes. It's a medical spa, a very exclusive medical spa in Geneva, Switzerland," Nathaniel clarified. "Are you aware that exactly 2.5 years ago, 6 months before you allegedly met Mr. Sterling at that charity gala, Richard Sterling wired $450,000 to Lumiere Aesthetics?" Hayes jumped to his feet. "Objection." "Relevance. My client's financial investments have nothing to do with this witness's testimony." "Your Honor," Nathaniel said smoothly, "the plaintiff has opened the door to the timeline of this affair and his supposed emotional distress. This financial transfer is directly relevant to both." "Overruled." "You may answer the question, Miss Beaumont," Judge Costa said, leaning forward, suddenly highly intrigued. Chloe shifted in her seat. "I don't know anything about Richard's business finances." "It wasn't a business finance, Miss Beaumont," Nathaniel said, pulling a piece of paper from the folder. "It was a direct payment for services rendered to an account under the name C. Beaumont. Tell me, did you enjoy your 6-month stay in Geneva? I understand a complete facial reconstruction, liposuction, and breast augmentation recovery process can be quite grueling." The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Richard half stood, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. "Objection," Hayes yelled, completely losing his composure. Judge Costa slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Order, order in this court, or I will clear the gallery." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes." Nathaniel waited for the noise to subside, his eyes locked on Chloe, who had gone ashen. "Let the record reflect," Nathaniel said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "that Richard Sterling did not meet a sympathetic stranger at a charity gala 2 years ago. 3 years ago, he met a 21-year-old receptionist, paid $500,000 to have her surgically reconstructed to his exact physical specifications, and installed her in a penthouse, all while publicly berating his wife for her natural physical appearance." Beatrice Sterling did not smile, but for the first time since she walked into the courtroom, she sat back against the mahogany bench, the heavy, suffocating weight of a decade of gaslighting finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. But Nathaniel wasn't done. He turned his gaze from the trembling mistress to the furious husband. The surgical bills were just the appetizer. The real document, the one that would not just win the case, but put Richard Sterling in a federal prison, was still resting quietly in Nathaniel's briefcase. The silence in courtroom 302 was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that followed the detonation of Nathaniel Reed's bombshell. Chloe Beaumont, stripped of her manufactured tragic romance, sat rigid in the witness chair, her surgically enhanced features frozen in terror. "I have no further questions for this witness," Nathaniel said quietly, closing his manila folder, "unless Mr. Hayes would like to redirect and explore the itemized billing of Miss Beaumont's rhinoplasty." Gregory Hayes, his shiny suit suddenly looking cheap and damp with sweat, shook his head violently. "No further questions. The witness is excused," Judge Marilyn Costas snapped, her eyes narrowed into predatory slits. "Mr. Hayes, I strongly suggest you reconsider your next move. You are skating on the razor's edge of presenting fraudulent testimony." Dull. "The plaintiff calls Richard Sterling to the stand," Hayes croaked, desperate to regain control of the narrative. Richard marched to the witness box. He adjusted his bespoke charcoal tie, attempting to project the formidable, intimidating presence of a CEO who regularly fired executives before his morning espresso. But the veneer was cracking. The press gallery, previously sympathetic to the narrative of a burdened titan, was now buzzing with venomous anticipation. Hayes approached the podium, skipping his planned questions about Richard's alleged emotional trauma. "Mr. Sterling, let us move past the distractions. Let us discuss the core of this divorce. You built Sterling Horizon Real Estate from nothing, correct? You are the sole architect of its $500 million valuation?" "Maptaumbu. Might soy de beer." "I am," Richard stated firmly, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. "I worked night and day. I secured the zoning permits for the Manhattan Skyline project. I courted the international investors. Beatrice stayed home. She contributed nothing to the operational success of the firm. Her physical decline was a direct reflection of her professional and personal apathy. She checked out of our marriage and my business a decade ago." "And the prenuptial agreement?" Hayes prompted. "It was signed when we had nothing," Richard lied smoothly. "It entitles her to 50% of all assets. But a partnership requires two partners. It is fundamentally unjust for a woman who has spent 10 years trapped in a prison of her own gluttony, refusing to attend galas, refusing to represent my brand, refusing to even walk down the stairs of our home, to walk away with $250 million of my hard-earned capital." Hayes nodded, looking to the judge. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. No further questions." Nathaniel Reed did not stand up immediately. He let the silence stretch, allowing Richard's arrogant words to hang in the stale courtroom air. Beside him, Beatrice Sterling finally shifted. She reached into her designer leather tote bag, pulled out a thick, leather-bound folio, and slid it silently across the mahogany table toward her attorney. Nathaniel stood, picked up the folio, and walked slowly toward Richard. "Mr. Sterling," Nathaniel began, his tone deceptively polite, "you just testified under oath that you built Sterling Horizon from nothing. Are you familiar with the legal definition of perjury?" "I am a businessman, Mr. Reed," Richard scoffed, crossing his arms. "I deal in facts. I built my company." "Facts," Nathaniel repeated. "Let's deal in facts. 15 years ago you were facing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Your first venture, Sterling Logistics, was drowning in $12 million of debt. You were 30 days away from federal insolvency. Do you deny this?" Richard's jaw tightened. "I had a temporary liquidity issue. It was resolved." "Yes, it was," Nathaniel said, extracting the yellow document from the folio. "It was resolved by Beatrice, specifically the transfer of $14 million from her personal inheritance at J.P. Morgan Chase directly into your corporate accounts, explicitly to satisfy your creditors. Is that correct?" "My wife made an investment," Richard muttered, his face reddening. "An investment that saved you from financial ruin," Nathaniel corrected sharply. "And in exchange for that investment, the prenuptial agreement was drafted not to protect your wealth, but to protect hers. She gave you the seed capital. But that was 15 years ago. Let us talk about today. Let us talk about why you are so utterly desperate to nullify this prenup by destroying my client's character." "I am seeking justice," Richard snarled. "I am seeking a fair dissolution of a marriage that has been dead for years." "Not Rita." "You are seeking a distraction," Nathaniel fired back, his voice finally rising, cracking like a whip across the room. "You brought your mistress to court. You paraded my client's medical history and physical appearance before the press. You labeled her a glutton, a shut-in, a liability. You created a massive, humiliating public circus because you needed a smokescreen. You needed the world to look at Beatrice Sterling's dress size so they wouldn't look at your balance sheet. Judge Costas leaned so far forward over her bench, she practically eclipsed the microphone. Mr. Reed, where exactly is this going? It is going to the heart of the fraud, Your Honor, Nathaniel said, turning to face the judge. Richard Sterling isn't divorcing his wife because she gained weight. He's divorcing his wife because he is missing $180 million and the bank is coming to collect. Pandemonium erupted. The gallery exploded into a cacophony of gasps and furious typing. Richard grabbed the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. Objection. Unfounded allegations. Defamation. Hayes screamed, waving his arms as if trying to physically bat the words out of the air. Overruled, Judge Costas bellowed, slamming her gavel with terrifying force. Sit down and shut up, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Reed, you had better have the paper to back up that claim. I have the paper, Your Honor, Nathaniel said, turning his lethal gaze back to the trembling CEO. I have the one document that is going to turn this entire verdict and Mr. Bill Sterling's life upside down. Nathaniel approached the witness stand, holding a single piece of paper encased in a clear plastic sleeve. It did not look like a dramatic piece of evidence. It looked mundane, boring even. But as Richard's eyes locked onto the blue stamp at the top of the page, the blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him the color of wet ash. Mr. Sterling, Nathaniel said softly, placing the document on the ledge in front of the witness. Could you read the letterhead on this document for the court? Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lips moved soundlessly. He looked wildly toward Hayes, but his lawyer was frozen in confusion. If the witness is unable, I will read it for the record, Nathaniel said loudly. This is an internal commercial loan agreement from Credit Suisse, dated 18 months ago. It outlines a massive line of credit $180 million, extended to a holding company named Apex International. Nathaniel turned his back to Richard, pacing slowly toward the center of the room. Apex International is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Sterling, you are the sole managing director of Apex International, are you not? It's a private development fund, Richard choked out, a bead of cold sweat dripping down his temple. A private development fund that you use to wildly speculate on luxury high-rises in Dubai, Nathaniel stated. High-rises that failed to secure zoning, failed to break ground, and subsequently collapsed into total insolvency. You lost $180 million of the bank's money in less than a year. The courtroom was dead silent. The press was capturing every syllable. Beatrice sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the man who had tormented her for a decade. She looked magnificent. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. But banks like Credit Suisse do not hand out $180 million without collateral, do they, Mr. Sterling? Nathaniel continued, his voice echoing in the silent room. They require ironclad guarantees. And your personal assets, Sterling Horizon, were already over-leveraged. You didn't have the collateral. Nathaniel walked back to the witness stand and tapped the plastic sleeve. So, you provided a guarantor. You provided a secondary signatory with a pristine, untouched billion-dollar generational trust fund. You provided your wife's signature. Objection. Hayes stammered, finally finding his voice, though it was weak and shaking. There is no proof my client signed anything fraudulently. Look at page 4 of the document, Mr. Sterling, Nathaniel commanded, ignoring Hayes entirely. That is the signature of Beatrice Sterling, authorizing the Vanderbilt Hayes Trust as collateral for your disastrous Dubai venture, a venture she knew absolutely nothing about. Richard was hyperventilating. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She signed it. She handles the household documents. She must have signed it. She did not sign it, Nathaniel said with lethal precision. Because Beatrice Sterling has a rare documented condition in her right hand, early onset rheumatoid arthritis, that forced her to switch to writing with her left hand 5 years ago. Her signature changed completely. The signature on this document is a perfect traced forgery of her old right-handed signature from a tax return filed 8 years ago. The collective gasp swept through the room. You forged her signature. Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You committed massive federal wire fraud to secure a loan you could never pay back, and when the venture collapsed and you realized Credit Suisse was going to audit the collateral, you panicked. Nathaniel turned to Judge Costas, mapping out the entirety of Richard's vile conspiracy. Your Honor, this entire divorce is a sham. The fact-shaming, the mistress, the public humiliation, it was all a calculated, desperate legal maneuver. By filing a high-profile lawsuit claiming his wife was mentally incompetent, deeply depressed, and guilty of constructive abandonment, Mr. Sterling was laying the groundwork to contest the bank's impending seizure of her assets. He was trying to establish a legal precedent that she was unwell, hoping he could either seize control of her trust via a conservatorship or throw her under the bus when the federal investigators came knocking. Knocked. That is a lie, Richard screamed, slamming his fist against the wood, though his voice cracked with pure terror. She is a lazy, disgusting woman who ruined my life. The only thing she ruined was your timeline, Nathaniel countered smoothly, because Beatrice didn't just sit at home eating takeout, as you so charmingly claimed. When she noticed discrepancies in the joint tax filings 2 years ago, she didn't cry. She hired Alvarez and Marshall, one of the most ruthless forensic accounting firms on Wall Street. Beatrice finally spoke. Her voice was rich, deep, and carried perfectly across the stunned courtroom. I let you think I was broken, Richard. I let you think your cruel little insults about my body were destroying my mind, because while you were busy paying for Chloe's new face and parading her around town, my accountants were tracking every single forged wire transfer you made to the Cayman Islands. She stood up. Her presence was commanding, a towering figure of absolute authority and unyielding dignity. I didn't abandon our marriage, Richard. I was simply waiting for you to build your own gallows. And you just pulled the lever on public record. Judge Costas removed her reading glasses. She looked at Richard Sterling not as a plaintiff, but as a criminal. Mr. Sterling, Judge Costas said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, I am instantly dismissing your petition to nullify the prenuptial agreement with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented by the defense, specifically this forged loan indemnification, I am formally requesting the bailiff to contact the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Richard slumped back in the chair, the arrogance completely drained from his body. He looked like a deflated, pathetic shell of a man. In the front row, Chloe Beaumont quietly gathered her designer purse, stood up, and practically sprinted out of the courtroom doors, abandoning her broken man without a second backward glance. You are not just losing half your company today, Mr. Sterling, Judge Costas finished, raising her gavel. You're very likely going to federal prison. This court is adjourned. The gavel cracked like thunder. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos as reporters scrambled for the doors to file the story of the decade. Flashbulbs went off as Beatrice stepped out from behind the defense table. She did not look at her soon-to-be ex-husband as he buried his face in his hands, surrounded by the furious, panicked hissing of his defeated attorney. Beatrice Sterling walked out of the courtroom with her head held high, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind her, leaving the ruins of Richard's empire and his life locked inside. Did Beatrice's ultimate revenge satisfy you? Sometimes the greatest weapon against a narcissist is letting them underestimate you. If you love this dramatic courtroom takedown and want more real-life stories of karma, revenge, and justice, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping twists.